Welcome, everyone, back to Webinar Wednesday, Alistair.
Indeed. It seems like it's been a while again.
It has been a while, so it's been a month, hasn't it? Because we're now on our new monthly regime of Webinar Wednesday. So welcome. Yeah. So I was just going to say welcome to everyone joining us for Webinar Wednesday, or either through In Control Scotland Facebook, In Control Scotland YouTube, or on Citizen Network TV. So wherever you're watching, welcome. And this week's Webinar Wednesday, we're going to focus on a new research report that we've recently just been involved in publicizing and publishing. And it's a report entitled Accountability and Implementation of Self-Directed Support, Complaints, Redress and Human Rights Principles. So we're going to talk to some of the people who are involved in carrying out that research on behalf of
a hugely interesting and important topic, touching on a lot of human rights stuff and processes, and look forward to having a catch up with them, definitely.
So they're going to join us in about 5 minutes, aren't they, Alistair?
Indeed. So what else have we been up to?
Well, this week a lot of our focus has been on the Working Together for Change program, which we're going to run from the end of October in a blended module, in a blended program. So sometimes meeting up, and then mainly over the winter not meeting up but doing it online. So that's going to be a really interesting thing that we're involved in, and we've been looking at all the applications and getting in touch with people about whether their applications have been successful or otherwise, just for this particular program. So that's been a lot of things we've been thinking about this week. Pauline, our new director, is speaking at a conference this morning. She would have been on with us, but she's speaking at a conference about homelessness and self-directed support. So that's an exciting and interesting thing to think about. And
it was good that we got lots of last-minute applications for the Working Together for Change, because we weren't sure we were going to get as many as we were expecting, but we got more than we needed in the end. So
but that often is the case, isn't it, Alistair?
Yes, last minute
deadline. I know, I'm exactly like that.
Yeah, indeed. So there's that. We're also running the Partners for Policy Making, and it's part of the rights and equalities work we've been doing. I've been in touch. I got contacted by the guy who runs this site called Welcome Me, which is an app which is quite interesting. It's about accessibility for people with disabilities when visiting shops and businesses, and it's got links to a number of other different interesting, related websites, such as Accessable and Ewan's Guide. And the idea is that you can kind of book in a visit with organizations that have signed up to this. And so that rather than just rocking up and hoping that you're going to be met with some understanding and any assistance that you need, you actually book that in advance, and you tell them a bit about yourself and what you're looking for, whether it's somebody to meet you at the door, help to access a toilet, a sighted guide, something like that, and that they have that information in advance, and that they should then hopefully be able to support you a bit better. So it was quite an interesting one, and one that we're speaking about hopefully maybe putting on the Mesh website when more exciting social lives and holidays when that kicks off. So that was quite an interesting one, I thought. It's always good, another bit of technology.
Where can people find out about that?
So what I'll do is, at the moment, if you look up Welcome Me with welcome with a capital M on the me, so that's Barbara Spicer. Yes, Alp's name is. If you just look up welcome, so I shall copy and put into the comments here. This is the actual. That's the if you go to this address that's in the comments, that's the visitors page, and you'll be able to see it from there. The icon itself, if you're looking up in an app store, is like a little pink circle with welcome on it.
Okay.
So that's always good.
That is good. So is that a good time for us to welcome our guests this week, Alistair?
I think. Oh, look at that! Seamlessly done. Here they come. The studio is getting filled up now.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Yes, it was the 6 of us on here today. So definitely welcome to the 4 of you. We're going to have a discussion, obviously, about the research report. But first of all, really, we just go around everyone and just get you to introduce yourself and say how you're involved in it, really. So on the screen, let's just go around in a clockwise direction. On the screen, Charmaine, you first.
Hi, good morning. Thanks very much, Keith. Yes, my name is Charmaine Gittins and I'm a PhD law student at the University of Strathclyde, and I was invited by the Director of Studies, Elaine Webster, to kindly join the research project during the completion of my master's degree, which was a very exciting prospect.
Okay, and you get to be on here as well, so there you are. Okay, thank you, Charmaine. Douglas, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, it's great to be here. Good to see everyone on the call, and hi to everyone also that's listening along. My name is Douglas Jack. I'm a teaching fellow in human rights law at the University of Strathclyde. I started that post, I think it was in 2019 now, so a couple of years. And Elaine, me and Elaine have known each other for a long time, and she asked me when we started to help her kind of lead the project. So I joined that way, and I very much enjoyed working through it with the research team, and thought the research was very interesting. So thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. And Elaine?
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Yeah, as we'll talk about a bit later, yeah, it was a really rich process doing the research, so it's brilliant to be able to talk about it and share it more. So I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Strathclyde Law School, and I lead our Centre for the Study of Human Rights Law, and also I lead the Master's Programme in Human Rights Law, and that connections through that, all of those things really are kind of led to the research. Again, we can talk about that later, but it's great to be here.
Okay, thank you. And finally, but not least, Claire.
Hi everyone, thanks for having us here today. My name's Claire Gallagher, and I was asked to join the research team as an LLM student in human rights law. So it was great to have some working knowledge of conducting research whilst in human rights in reality while working, while studying the program, the human rights law program. So it was really great and really exciting to be here and finally share it with everybody.
Okay, thank you. Alistair, do you want to ask the first question?
Yes, indeed. So just he says opening up his questions. So yeah, so oh jeepers, everything goes funny when you start to. No, you go for the first question. I'll go for the second question, Keith.
Okay.
How about that?
Okay. So really, the first question is it's quite a simple one, and we're just really asking, tell us why the research was carried out and what was it intended to do. So just really from your perspective, just give us an idea about why the research was carried out. What was the aim behind it, and what was it intending to do? So I'm just not sure who'd like to start with that one.
Yeah, well, I can maybe start because it was really through discussions that I had with Dr. Sam Smith, who Sam, I guess many people listening in today will probably know Sam, who's the director and founder of Sea Change Scotland. And Sam did the master's programme in human rights law, and she graduated in 2017 from that programme. And it was through that she and I started to have discussions around social care and human rights. And she raised the point about the Self-Directed Support Act, which had been, an exciting and potentially transformative piece of legislation. But she really felt that its potential was not being fulfilled. And because she'd come to study human rights law, she was making those connections and thinking about, well, why have there not been any high profile legal challenges? Are human rights being used to challenge decision making in relation to self-directed support in Scotland? And Sam also then she wrote a book in the following year in 2018 on human rights in health and social care, and it was called, the subtitle was Putting Human Rights into Practice. And I remember, I think it was in late 2018 that we held a book launch at the university, and so we kept this conversation going basically, and it was really from 2017 actually that Sam and I started talking about it. So it took a long time to get off the ground, but it really felt that there was something there. And I think from our point of view at the Centre for the Study of Human Rights Law, we knew that there were issues, human rights dimensions related to self-directed support. We really focus, as we mentioned in the introduction to the report, on the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities from 2006. We know that since 2009, the UK, including Scotland, has agreed to put that international agreement into practice. And part of that is about enabling people to live independently. So, and we could also see, we wondered about the links to the Human Rights Act in the UK. So we knew the links were there, but we didn't know quite what they were. And we felt that we could bring some legal expertise to the project. And at that time, when we started talking about this research, there hadn't been any high profile legal challenges that we were aware of. We now know, having done the research, that there have been lots of legal challenges, but often they don't get to formal processes within the judicial system, or they don't progress to the higher tiers of the judicial system. We also know, and we were really interested to learn recently, that just this year, the Court of Session in Scotland had delivered a judgment based on the Self-Directed Support Act. And we've mentioned that a little bit in our in a note within the report. And that's a kind of first tier decision within the Court of Session. I'm not aware where that might go, but yeah, basically there seemed to be that gap around legal challenges. So that's how we got involved.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Alistair?
Okay. Yeah,
you also just been putting up the links to where people can access the report, just if they haven't seen it yet as well.
Yeah, that's just we can share a bit about the briefing paper. I won't share the whole report because it's obviously quite a lengthy report because there's a lot of detail in there, and we'll come to that later on. But just thinking about
access both. Sorry, just to say, people can access both a short briefing paper about the research in the report, and then obviously the full report quite easily, including on our website. Yeah. So if you just go to the In Control Scotland, well, we shared the link there, but the other way to do it is if you just go In Control Scotland, and if you go to our news page, you can download it off our news page straight away. So we're hello, so a few folk watching here, and we've also got legal challenges often not an opportunity when the authority kicks the can down the road. Processes can rumble on for years and carers are busy caring, and that's obviously one of the key areas that you came up with, that you focused on, was the length of time. And but before we get into some of that detail, just a little bit about how you went about carrying out the research, because obviously it was in the middle of a pandemic. There was all sorts of things that got in the way. Anything you want to share about that part of it?
Thanks, Alistair. I'll take the lead on this if you don't mind. So, as you mentioned, COVID times still are very challenging, and we wanted to keep going with the research project and enable us to do and be as mostly proactive as possible. So, we started off with the criteria of interviewing law centre staff, advocacy agency workers, but because of COVID restrictions, we had to utilise Zoom, which was very helpful. And so we conducted many of our interviews over Zoom. So these took place with about 1 hour in total, maximum of 1 hour. And we had a selection series of questions whereby we'd ask participants and go through. So it enabled us to continue our research, but with restrictions in mind. Luckily, we were still able to continue. But we also carried out two separate interviews, which were returned by written response. So there were a total of 29 participants contacted in this process. 15 of those came back as total interviews, and 13 were conducted via Zoom, and 2 of those were returned via written response. So we had a good uptake overall. I think it's safe to say that despite the restrictions and obviously other work pressures, everybody was very busy. It was quite a chaotic period of time for everyone. And so, we did our best to keep going and conduct all of the interviews. And it was very rewarding, despite sometimes having technical hitches and internet glitches, but it was, for a good reason. And we're very grateful to everybody who participated.
Yep, and if I could just jump in there as well, I would just say that in some ways, having Zoom maybe allowed us to carry out more interviews than potentially we could have otherwise, because we would only have a certain amount of money to kind of travel to different places and meet different people. So in some ways, that wasn't a good thing, and we always want to meet people in person, but it maybe opened up some opportunities that we wouldn't necessarily have had otherwise, and maybe our report is slightly richer because of that.
Yeah, that's interesting, because we found it as well that particularly people from rural areas, their ability to engage in a lot of consultations and a variety of different things that are on have been much helped by the digital age, where they've got the technology and where they can connect with it. I'm just checking, because we've got a couple of people watching today who I don't think have been at Webinar Wednesdays before. So just a reminder that this, because it isn't a Zoom call format, you can't, we don't have anybody else coming on to ask their questions in person. So if you just put any questions you've got for any of the panel, you just put them in the comments, and we will have a go at answering them as they come up. I guess that this is specifically about this research, and if there's other things beyond that, then we can maybe pick that up separately with people. So.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I mean, there's obviously only 4 of us, well, 6 of us on just now, but there were more people involved in the research team as well, weren't there? Just acknowledging really that it within the full report that everybody who's involved from the research team is acknowledged in there, aren't there? So there's a number of other students involved in as part of that research. I
think one thing that's maybe important to say is. So we have both Claire and Charmaine, who were on the LLM and human rights law at the time, so kind of broadly within the Centre for Study of Human Rights Law. But this was in a kind of connection with the Strathclyde Law Clinic as well, which is a kind of organisation that provides kind of free legal advice to people that maybe don't qualify for legal aid, but are unable to kind of access a lawyer. So there was some students from the law clinic involved as well, and they also contributed to the research. So it's a kind of combination between the two.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And I guess that's one of the things that comes out in the report is the access to the information, to the specialist information, because a lot of people are just lost with that whole the level of expertise that they have to have in order to navigate the systems and to challenge, and there's just that inequality of power, isn't there? Is there anything else? Sorry, I'm jumping into another question there. Keith, do you want to ask another question?
No, I was just going to check if there's any other things that you wanted to identify in terms of challenges in carrying it out, because obviously it was carried out, as you said, Charmaine, in exceptional times, and when it was first talked about, it wasn't going to be like that. It was going to be going to meet people in person. But were there any other, apart from obviously the COVID restrictions and the massive whatever interruptions that caused, difficulties that caused. Was there anything else that got in the way, or anything else that you thought, okay, this is making it more harder than it might have been?
Thanks, Keith.
Oh, sorry, Charmaine. I was just going to say there was one thing that struck me was when we were like looking back at the interviews, the recordings, then there was so much rich detail that for us that posed a challenge, because to undertake 15 interviews is like a full-scale kind of research project, and as Charmaine said, people were so generous with their time and really shared so much incredibly rich information that was a challenge for us to capture in the report. And the report, I think, we didn't expect that it would be like 40 pages long. So yeah, we hope we've kind of done justice to to all of the contributions. But that's a challenge from a different perspective, a good challenge, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful. I'm just going to pick up on a couple of the comments here. So Barbara Spicer is saying about the 3-year time bar taking effect. So some of the hurdles, I guess, that are put in place about if you don't take action in a certain length of time, which of course can be affected by your state of mind and how much energy you've got for things. And we've got some examples of detail here about somebody talking about their experience, and people asking for your contact details. And I guess that what we need to be clear of is you've completed the bit of research, and that's a finished bit of work. But I guess what we'll do as part of our commitment is to try and connect to the projects that are up and ongoing. Just to share, in response to the other question that's come up here, is there a resource which highlights human rights and how it can be used? This is a budget screen share from me to save time. So this is the MECOP one, which was hugely beneficial, a project which is entitled "Challenging Social Care Decisions in Scotland: A Legal Guide," and it came with some training and some examples of stuff. But unfortunately, that's not on the go anymore. So I'm still in trying to contact MECOP to ask whether or not we can still digitally share it, because I have it digitally, but I wanted approval. So if anybody from MECOP is watching, you can be in touch.
Yeah, MECOP was mentioned in the interviews as well. Someone that definitely came up that had been a very useful resource.
Yeah. I think I would just reiterate, Alistair, that if anybody's got any of their personal circumstances that they want to get in touch with us about, really just get in touch with us at the info@in-control-scotland.org.uk address, and we'll get back to people really with any things that we know that might help with their personal situations, and or link them with other people who could do that. So that's
absolutely.
Yeah, because there are other organizations that could help people as well take forward specific things. So okay, so our next question that we're going to ask in relation to the research was really just about the things that people, just really any of the things that people were saying to you that really struck you, and also things that people said that surprised you. So yeah, just anything that in the course of those interviews that struck you and or that surprised you.
I think I'll start. The first thing that I think really struck me when we were conducting the interviews, I wouldn't say I was surprised, but it was very interesting, was that when you are going through your complaints process and you're talking about where you make a complaint to, the formalities to go through before you get to a legal aspect of the complaints process, many in the implementation of SDS, many, if not most of the conversations were based on financial constraints and financial issues. rather than framing it around the legal aspect of this SDS Act or even a human rights aspect. So the implementation, social workers have a duty to implement the SDS Act, and that provides control and power for the person. And it was very interesting when they had questions or queries about service users about their access to SDS. It was normally about, well, we don't really have a budget for that much. We have a budget for this much. And it was conversations were focused on finances and budgets and bureaucratic systems rather than the care of the person, the human rights of a person. I found it very interesting. I wasn't particularly surprised, unfortunately, but I found it very interesting considering that the SDS Act is a very progressive, and that was something that the participants did recognise. It is a progressive piece of legislation, but its implementation, there seems to be a bit of a gap in the knowledge and the understanding of what that means in reality and in practice.
Yeah, I think, like you say, I don't think that's surprising, but it is really interesting, isn't it? That the conversations were framed around budgets and what could be, I don't know, what could be afforded in some way, rather than people's rights to access the support that would work for them and so on. Yeah.
There was one, a similar thing really struck me actually. And there's a really powerful quote from one of the participants where they say, it links to what Claire just said, where they say local authorities think this is their money, they control it. And the participant said that it was money and control, I quote, and said that local authorities and their experience wanted to hold on to both of those things. And raised the question about whether local authorities were actually the best organisations to deliver something like self-directed support and to fulfil the underpinning principles and the potential of it. And I thought that was really striking. And in a sense, it kind of highlights where the focus or the importance of what happens before we get into the complaints process at all. Because another thing I found really striking was that sometimes people said the complaints process works, like you know where to go, there is an avenue, and sometimes actually just the practice of raising a complaint can lead to better outcomes. So in that sense, sometimes it can be effective. And from our point of view, we don't want to, because we're looking at complaints and judicial avenues, we don't want to highlight that this is necessarily a fruitful and an easy route. And I think in all areas of, especially in the implementation of human rights, it's all about a proactive approach, as we don't want to leave, want to avoid people going through legal avenues. That's absolutely clear. So that point about when processes can be effective, I think, was also quite striking.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'll just bring up just for a second just some of the quotes from the research, and this is from the briefing paper. So it's interesting that how it's been framed in different areas, isn't it? The understanding that it's rare for people to get a really good outcome from it. There were as many positive responses as there were negative ones, but even the positive ones might have been grudging, very slight improvements.
Just on that. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So I was just going to say there was an interesting quote. I'm not sure whereabouts it is in the report now, but about the financial side, and somebody had said, a participant had said that local authorities can't afford human rights, and that was a very a big statement to make, but it was true. And as well as there being a lack of authorities, it was this: how do we go through a human rights avenue when we don't know about human rights? And even if we do get to that stage, we've got a lack of solicitors that specialise in human rights law within the SDS Act or social. There wasn't enough people there to even help you through that process.
You also made the point there, Alistair, about sometimes the kind of remedy that the the local authorities willing to give is grudging, and I think we've seen that also with some of the comments in the chat already. Some people have made similar points, and for me, I think my big takeaway from this was, one thing that really struck me is, for thinking about lack of legal challenges, there's maybe a kind of tension between kind of individual redress and an individual case. So an individual getting the result that they're happy with or at least willing to accept, and the kind of broader change that could come about as a result of a legal challenge. So the fact that that is making some sort of kind of fundamental change or interpretation of the law, which actually might change culture or change practice more generally, because you can point towards that case and say, well, this is shown to be unlawful in some way, or that the local authority hasn't implemented SDS correctly, and that might change practice elsewhere. So I think the local authorities potentially, and this isn't all of them obviously, as the example of good practice, they kind of maybe know that to a certain extent, and that's why we have maybe some situations where when it becomes serious, they're happy to give individual redress, and that's obviously what the individual wants in the first place. But they're a wee bit more afraid of this kind of broader change that could come around with this kind of judicial review or any kind of legal challenge.
It's interesting as well, though, that I think partly why we've called it accountability has been featured in the, because it's not about one lot versus another lot, and just that one-upmanship that can sometimes get, it's more important to win. That sort of, it's about human rights. It's about not, it's not about, you winning because you've got a good argument. It's about the human rights aspects and the entitlement and that accountability, and that the nature of the individuality of some of those responses still does seem out of kilter with a national response, which is, you've got SDS guidance, you've got, there's an act. There's been lots of clarification about what people should be able to expect, and yet it still seems to come down to who they speak to, and that all that stuff, round about, like you said, about what's allowed, or whether they acknowledge that redress is possible, for example, and then quite often people are told absolutely not, we will not do that, and then a couple of letters and a bit of later you find out, oh, actually it is entirely possible and it has happened elsewhere. And for me, that just destroys trust, doesn't it? Because it's better to be really honest and start an equal dialogue rather than this one where we hold the power and you have to prove that you can get this, because that just erodes away a lot of those points. I don't know if there's anything around that from any of the things that have come up. Just in terms of one of the points that Barbara Spicer makes about a sort of postcode lottery. Obviously, you didn't get to all of the postcodes in Scotland. It was more central belt. But is there any other points that you want to make around about the disparity or that individual rather than corporate response? That would be helpful, do you think?
Thanks, Alistair. I just wanted to pick up on Claire's earlier point as well, actually, interrelated to the research geographical areas that we focused on, because it was North, South Lanarkshire, Edinburgh, Glasgow, the key areas. And as your colleague just mentioned there in the chat, about querying the Postcode Lottery. So I think it would be interesting going forward to discover more about other areas. And I think there's somebody else mentioned Fife as well. Seeing, the responses from those 4 areas where our research was focused on gives us fascinating insight, but looking at the broader picture, and as Douglas said earlier, looking forward and how things could change in the broader picture, and culture will be interesting to see how this adapts geographically.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking is just remembering for everybody that we are discussing this now in the context of the current and active consultation, which is around about the National Care Service, or what the National Care Service might and should look like. So really just a reminder that people have got the opportunity to provide their responses into that National Care Service consultation, which is carrying on until the 2nd of November. So as long as you're not watching this after the 2nd of November, you've still got a chance to contribute to that. We probably should move on to the key findings from the report. And you actually just, one of the screens that you showed, Alistair, was just the...
Yeah, I'll just put it back up again if you want.
Maybe if we just ask people just to share them with us first.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to start on, I know you're normally supposed to start in the middle and at the beginning and move down, but the kind of one that was interesting for me, and all of them were, but particularly was the kind of lack of kind of legal support or available legal support in this area. And that was a very important and key finding we found. And in fact, even if we're thinking back to process, we found it actually really difficult to get in touch and speak to law centres and law centre solicitors through the course of the research. So I think we initially contacted 10 law centres, mainly in Edinburgh and Glasgow. We found it quite difficult to find exclusive law centres in either North or South Lanarkshire. And most of them got back to us and said that they didn't have any knowledge or experience in dealing with SDS related complaints. And a lot of them kind of maybe indicated that they weren't really sure what SDS really was. And I think that also came through maybe some of the interviews with advice agencies and advocacy organisations, is that sometimes when they referred complaints to solicitors, the solicitor would come back and maybe mention some out-of-date legislation or legislation that wasn't relevant. So overall, we saw that maybe there was a lack of kind of knowledge on behalf of solicitors about the legislation, and that wasn't necessarily to do with a lack of demand for that service. It was more about the lack of supply. And I think that's maybe tied into a kind of broader issue, which is lack of legal funding for these kind of claims. We know that law centres are fantastic. I think it was Jacqueline in the chat there just mentioned Govan Law Centre, who are fantastic, and they do provide a fantastic service, but they can only kind of help people if they have legal funding for that. And I think that was a big issue, is that it is very difficult to get legal funding for these kind of claims. We also saw kind of, as I said, a more general kind of lack of legal expertise. But we found that that was one big issue, or one big barrier to legal challenges, is that if we don't have the supply or the ability for lawyers to kind of make these challenges or assist people in these challenges, then it's very unlikely that you're going to have any sort of form of legal challenge. So I would say that was one of the big findings that we had.
Perfect, thanks for that. Anybody else want to pick up on any of the key findings?
I think one of the other, I think it's the first one on your page, the processes. So one of the key findings was that there are complaints avenues, like complaints processes exist, and accessing putting in a complaint didn't seem to be like there was knowledge of that process within local authorities, but there seemed to be inconsistent approaches. So a complaint process can depend on the individual local authority. Every local authority has a different way and avenue to go through the complaints process, and that created a barrier in the sense of it depended on what local authority you were actually in. But secondly, it could even come down to one of the participants had said, depends on who you got on the phone. Like if it was somebody answering the phone that day, oh, you've got the wrong number, or you need to call this number. And the next day it could be somebody else. It's just about that individual worker's knowledge. And it just showed that your dependency on the complaint process, while yes, there were many positive outcomes for complaints, them getting settled before legal action, as we've talked about before, but there was many various factors that made it very dependable on what your outcome was, and there was a clear fear of when you make a complaint, even if you're not looking to go through a full legal avenue, that it might damage your relationship with your social worker later on. And it's about touching on what you were saying before, Alistair, about trust, and starting off on the grounds of a trusting relationship and an equal relationship between a worker and an individual, and concern that if you could make a complaint about their implementation, that might in the long run impact you negatively. And that's a very real concern.
That's interesting, isn't it? That if there's not a clarity about this is the whole spectrum of when things start off, what can you be clear that you expect? How do you informally raise things? What could then come next? And a sense that is all part of a really valid process, rather than some real challenge to the system that's going to put you at odds with a local authority and make you feel really vulnerable. I personally think that's something that would be, it'd be a huge strength to the project, to the whole process, if that could be generalised and made similar throughout the whole of Scotland, because I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be, so that you can just lay that all out from the start. This is how you can expect things, and it's all valid and it's all logical, and you've got similar points of contact in each organisation, so people don't get lost in the system, because people do get just completely destroyed by the amount of energy and time it can take, and that's not good for anybody, really.
No, and I think somebody mentioned it in the comments about when you're caring for somebody, as often people who benefit from SDSR, getting through your complaints process will take a lot of energy, a lot of time. You're also caring for somebody, and that's before you even get, if you go a legal avenue, which then is another whole other can of worms. And that was something that many of the advocacy participants and law centre participants highlighted as well.
Another note there is to touch upon the human rights aspect, which is on the screen that you shared, Alistair. But that's something that's integral to the potential for improving outcomes for individuals. That utilisation of human rights as a fundamental aspect in promoting the complaints process or somehow framing the complaints around the human rights, which is something that we discovered.
Wow.
Brilliant.
Yeah, well, and there are a few comments obviously that are acknowledging that as well. Don't know. We've got maybe another few minutes, but not lots more time. But just sharing anything about the barriers that people do face. We've also in the briefing paper and in the main report, of course, mentioned a lot about, or rather reflect on the different types of barriers that people face in terms of taking forward in terms of seeking redress more generally, actually, rather, however they're taking it forward.
Yeah. And I think we really saw that through the complaints process, no matter how it unfolded, and regardless of the fact that some individuals did get the result that they wanted, regardless of that, the three key findings around the process, the availability or limited availability of legal support, and also the lack of, people were quite split on the human rights aspect. Some people knew a lot, some people didn't know anything, but there was a clear lack of detailed knowledge of human rights. So when all of those things came together, this led to a number of barriers that we could see that were put in people's way. And this partly stemmed from what people have been raising, the fact that the burden is placed on individuals who are already in challenging circumstances, which seems really problematic. Knowledge barriers added into that, and all round, not just on the part of individuals, making complaints, but potentially advocacy workers, social workers, clearly, and also solicitors. So it was kind of all round this knowledge barrier that was put in people's way. The relational barriers, sometimes that worked in people's favour, having a good relationship with a social worker, but as Claire mentioned, often people had a real fear that it would jeopardise that relationship. There was the legal support, that lack of legal support created a barrier, and also the length of the legal process if people did go down that route, and the idea that people would fight for years to pursue a complaint that would then get settled at the last minute. And as like Douglas mentioned at the start, and someone I think mentioned in the comments, then the local authority would capitulate at that point, you know, at the very last minute. So this all of these things came together that showed just how wearisome, I think, is the word that we use in the conclusion, a really wearisome and burdensome process for individuals. So which suggests that there really is, you know, that doesn't accord really with the principle and the ambition of the legislation.
It is interesting that bit about if there's no new information being introduced, but only the pressure for increased levels of action, and something that say maybe takes 2 years to get settled. The question the question I'm interested in is, so what is an organisation then going to do about their processes to make sure that the next battle isn't exactly the same? Because that's where we come back to the accountability bit of it. Because if the next person starts at the bottom rung of the ladder again, then we haven't really learned anything, or we're willfully ignoring that knowledge. And so it's that lack of that experience being back in the system, and also the wastefulness of committee after committee after committee to maybe save £500, £1,000. You know, you'll have, you know, a bunch of people sitting around a table arguing, all that stress on the individual for months and years to do what? To settle, to reach an agreement that could have been a reasonable agreement earlier. It just really doesn't make much sense in this day and age that's still the experience of so many people. Any final points that folk want to make, either about the research or what they would hope to see happening next?
I think, can I just say something there, Alistair, just before, and then we'll go around and get everybody's final comments. I think we'd be really keen just to continue a conversation with anybody who's interested in, so if people are interested in continuing that conversation and trying to answer some of those questions, like, so there's a comment there. We're just going to put that other question again as well, Alistair. How can the awareness of human rights legislation, how it relates to health, and so how can we raise awareness? So that's a fundamental question almost for us. So if people are interested in, we'll have a think about how we try and continue that conversation. But if people are interested, please get in touch with us, and we'll make sure that you're involved in that continuing conversation. So I suppose I just wanted to say that bit first, and then if we can go around, just any final comments from each of our guests today.
Well, I'll go round in order as we did in the beginning. Thanks ever so much for having us today, and I want to thank all my colleagues as well, just to take this opportunity quickly, and all of the participants for the rich experience that we gained, and all of the personal insights into various experiences. So it's fantastic that we've got this far, but I think, as you said just now, Keith, it's continuing that conversation and how things can potentially change. That's going to be a healthy dialogue for the future. So thank you.
And I would completely echo what Charmaine said. One thing just that I picked up on when you were talking there, Alistair, and from one of the comments again, was part of the issue seems to be, and as you say, it is often that it's almost like some of the local authorities haven't necessarily bought into the values of the legislation. And maybe, I think someone mentioned at the beginning that there was, or in the comments, that there was maybe a lack of training in the first instance. And maybe that's something also to think about, because we do want a proactive approach. We want local authorities and social workers who are in challenging positions to understand the value of the legislation and to buy into its values. So that's another potential way to kind of to look at it as well, I would say.
Yeah, and I think we've actually learned a huge amount from this report that can help us understand bigger questions about human rights implementation in Scotland. And that's something that's really on the agenda at the moment, and the question of culture within local authorities and how we actually support local authorities across many areas of the services that they deliver to take more ownership over human rights principles and standards, and look at those in conjunction with the legislation and take a proactive approach. I think they are the duty bearers, and the burden needs to be on them, but they need to be supported to do that. So I think that we can draw insights from this report actually that can contribute to much broader conversations as well.
Brilliant, thanks.
Finally, I'm just again echo what everybody said. Thank you so much for having us here today, and it's been great to even interact with the comments and the people watching. It's been really great, and I'm glad that we're here and it can be used. I think what this research shows is that awareness is a key factor, and it will be really, I think what will be really interesting to see is Elaine mentioned a focus on implementation just now of human rights law. It'll be interesting to see about the National Care Act. Would that make a more inclusive approach? It'd be really interesting to see. But again, about changing the culture of separate local authorities is really, really important. And raising awareness is really important, and it's just about everybody working together. If we've got this research, it can be shown in a matter of different avenues and aspects. So it's an exciting time, hopefully.
Yeah. And can I squeeze in just a final thank you to Sam Smith, because she really instigated all of this conversation with us at Strathclyde. So and she's really supported throughout. She provided training to the students and so on. So yeah, thank you, Sam.
Perfect. Cheers.
Okay.
So yeah.
So we would just say thank you for all your involvement, including joining us today on what we call Webinar Wednesday, which happens every month now. So the next one would be the first Wednesday of November, the 3rd of November. Lots of comments along the side, and lots of people are, I think, looking forward to getting more information and accessing and reading the report. Alistair, anything you want to add?
Yeah, well, I just think that, again, as we go forward into this Working Together for Change programme, I think that In Control's always been about not blaming one group for this. It's about creating trust and creating a sense of, well, this is our responsibility and this is how we can do it well, because sometimes it is the bureaucracy of people to try and do well, and the work of individuals gets swallowed up within all of this. So if we can find ways to simplify, to humanise, and to make sure that any decisions that are made in health and social care are not made just because, computer says no. It's because, who is this person that's in front of us, and what makes sense, and that we support each other to challenge appropriately at every level, at informal and formal levels, so that we get better outcomes for people, rather than just ticking the box to say, well, this is what the process said, so I did it, even if it wasn't very human or very effective. So I really think that this is going to be a valuable addition to that arsenal of things, tools that we can use to draw on. So thanks very much. Keith?
Yeah, and as we've said, we want to continue this conversation, so we would be really keen for those people who want to, either watching it live now or watching afterwards, to get in touch with us. And if you did miss any of it, a couple of people said sorry for joining late, then you can actually see the start of the conversation on our Facebook and YouTube channels, because this will stay there as a recorded version. So thank you, everyone, and
thank you.
Hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
Cheers,
days.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks ever so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.